Hi, this is Nino from Cinema 5D. Together with the guys at Filmstro, we are starting a new series of tutorials looking at music for film. And we'll dive right in with Seb from Filmstro. Hi Seb.
Hi Nino, thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, thanks for being on this, common tutorial. We'll talk about in this first episode about seeing music, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a really interesting thing that we've created whereby we hopefully are kind of bridging the gap between visual language used by filmmakers and then obviously the more abstract kind of terminology around music that musicians are used to, which even amongst professional musician circles isn't actually that useful, to be honest. So we've kind of broken it down into three key elements, which we feel are sort of the building blocks of music. I will tell you up front what they are, but I want to dive straight in and literally show you these in some video clips I've got prepared. So we have, first of all, there's the element of momentum. The second element is depth. And the third element is power. So let's dive right in. I'm going to show you a small clip here from one of the Bourne films. And I'm just going to hit play and we're going to check this out and then I'll say a few words about momentum. Okay, so as you can see, there was really, really fast, percussive beat, incredibly kind of high frequency music in the sense that there were a lot of elements happening. If you were to do a very, very an analogy, I guess it would be the difference between something like this, which is very, very slow, to the difference between something like this. So that's, for me, that's high momentum, that's fast momentum. The next clip, let's dive straight in and look at something which is completely the opposite. Yep. So here you're going to see some music which is very, very slow. Let's watch this next clip together.
You can embody the best of both worlds. The dream your mother and I dedicated our lives to preserve. The people of Earth are different from us, it's true. But ultimately...
So in that clip we could see, there literally wasn't an awful lot happening. Musically there was kind of just this bed, it was a kind of support, it was practically just an ambience. And there weren't, we couldn't hear many notes, we couldn't hear much melody. There certainly wasn't a kind of that fast element. What I think is interesting, if we could just go from the top again and watch that first clip again, and just notice how from a filmmaking point, you can probably say something about this as well. It seems to me that in the first clip, what is also happening in terms of momentum is also happening visually. So, would you...
Absolutely, it's like a fast sequence of cuts. That is supported by also actually having a lot of percussive elements actually gives you a chance to edit very quickly. A track like that makes it easy to cut to if you have a finished track, to start with. But obviously, if it's composed on top of the music, it supports each other. Yeah, fast-paced camera movement, a lot of handheld stuff. A lot of actually surprisingly close shots or medium-sized shots, which actually makes the movement look even faster, kind of. Like if you use a wide-angle lens close to an actor, moving with him, that kind of supports that. And imagine that clip with a classical piece of music. It would have a completely different feeling. And
exactly.
This is the obvious, I think, the obvious soundtrack to this type of camera work and edit.
Exactly. And so as a contrast then in this slower one, if again we talk about that one then from your point of view, from a layman's point of view, because I don't know of course that much about film, and obviously our expertise is the music, I feel like there's not even much happening in terms of visuals, right? What would you say?
Absolutely. It's just, it's a conversation basically. What I find interesting is that you have musical elements used as Foley. You have like this gate or door opening in the background, revealing the Superman costume, and the turning of this statue which wears the costume itself. It's basically a score. So you hear that this is actually the orchestra playing that, but it is used as Foley, which is an interesting element. So it's kind of, and that also, like from a filmic standpoint, that kind of lifts this, how should I say, the aura of that Superman costume to a different level, because it kind of, it brings it up to something more important, subconsciously, I think, because it's not just, you know, some added Foley. It's definitely, you know, that you know, you hear that this is orchestra making these sounds, which is completely unrealistic. But of course, you know, like for a supernatural film like Superman, like a Superman character is absolutely fitting.
Yes, absolutely. So that, Phil, thanks for giving me your kind of point of view in terms of the, you know, the camera work, the kind of underlying scene, the emotion that needs to be kind of portrayed. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm going to say a little bit about instrumentation in a little bit, but let's move on first and look at the next key element. So we've done momentum, which is the kind of the difference between something very, very kind of fast and full paced compared to something much more empty, much more sparse. So the next one is depth. Now, if we watch the next clip together, this is an example of very, very little depth. So let's watch it, and I'll say a few more words on that. So in that one then, what I think again is interesting is that, so for us, we would say that this is not a lot of depth at all, because for us depth is defined by literally how deep something is, how full-bodied something is, the shading, the gravitas, you know, the weight of something. And again, these are all fairly visual, fairly kind of normal kind of terms, I guess, from the art world, things like, you know, shading and you know, depth itself perhaps, and, you know, adding, I don't know, kind of extra kind of lines or more body, I suppose, to something. In music, I guess we would talk more about kind of tone, mood, you know, emotion, those kinds of things. And for me, this clip was, it was very, very high. So all the instruments were basically high up. So think like a female singer singing quite high as opposed to a man singing very, very low. Let's move straight on and look at the opposite then. So if that was no depth at all, let's watch the next clip for a lot of depth. So this again, so perfectly, I think, illustrates the opposite of that clip earlier with Harry Potter. So now we have very, very deep sounds, very, very low sounds, and I think also from a filmmaking point of view, I think what would be great, we'll look at both clips again, but I'd love your kind of opinion then on also, because to me, I would say from a layman's point of view, in Harry Potter we were literally looking up. And there were these sprite-like kind of beings, very ethereal, very light, clearly not actually made of much, so they're very weightless, again supporting the idea that it's up high. And I think there's just this unambiguity. It's very, very clear to me that, you know, what you see is ultimately kind of what you expect to hear.
So basically, what you see here is some, you know, actually, it's like a rabbit made out of, I don't know what, smoke
or something,
And it more for me describes the feeling that the characters in the movie have when they see that, because it's kind of a jolly feeling. It's happy. It is definitely something that, you know, you can probably define that better in musical terms, but it is absolutely something happy, you know, like it makes you, it could also be, I mean, Harry Potter to a degree is a children's movie, but it is definitely something that could be in a cartoon as well.
I think you hit it exactly on the head, the happy jolliness. I think what we need to do now is to have a very, very quick review of maybe the first parameter again. So thinking about the first element of momentum, actually this idea of depth here, yes, I've illustrated the fact that in this scene it is just high instruments, but what you've rightly pointed out, there's a jolliness there, which of course is about the underlying harmonic structure, but also very, very importantly, there is quite a lot of momentum in there. So this actually now combines and shows the interrelationship of these key elements. So we have something that's high, but on top of that, the fact that these are high instruments, very, very thin, supporting the idea that this is something quite breathy. And also I find it, again, a very interesting thing that the instruments that really stand out are actually wind instruments. So quite literally the human breath, which again is air, which is light, you know, is actually in this scene from an auditory point of view. Subtly so, unconsciously so. I don't expect everybody would go, oh, that's a flute, someone's blowing that. But it's there, the wind is there.
Well, I think so. There is like this, you know, there's definitely this airy feel about everything. And obviously what you see is basically air in this scene. Also, what's interesting to point out from a filmic standpoint is that you could put this piece of music under basically every, like, I mean, like the edit does not really matter that much. How the clips are put together and where the edit points are. Because the music itself, because it, you know, doesn't really give you any, you know, like percussive elements or anything that would warrant a cut as opposed to
Yes.
very much like the first thing we saw, the Jason Bourne one. So it emphasizes more the feeling, but you could also, you could take a completely different scene and put that track over it, and it will probably work very easily without any adjustments whatsoever to the edit, unless it's a really fast-paced thing. Like if you put that under the Jason Bourne one, it would be strange because it's like
Sure.
It seems like way too many edits and
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it has the momentum, interestingly, but the depth would have been all wrong.
Exactly.
It's too high and too.
But you could use like a long, like a long scene without a long shot without any cut, and it will work with anything basically.
So the next one then was the lot, the kind of high depth, if you like, or having a lot of depth in there. Again, I think from a filmmaking point of view, again only in layman's terms, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like, again, pretty much the opposite of what we saw with the Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we were kind of looking down. We had a lot of, like I just described, they were bigger sounds, they are lower sounds. There's a heaviness there, and clearly Megatron is heavy. We had elephants who were scared of him, again heaviness. There was a darkness to it as well. If we're talking about color tone or mood, I think there was something about having a lower depth which just suggests intuitively and instinctively for everybody, oh wow, this is a bit darker, this is more threatening, and even and again this thing that, like I was saying with the flute, there was there's human breath in the instruments, which is light. If we kind of analyze, I know this is very very deconstructive, if you like, but I do find it fascinating that the key instrument that was used for this Megatron scene was a double bass, which, for those who don't know, is the largest stringed instrument there is, made of wood. Wood being, a tree which is rooted in the earth. You can't get lower than that. Do you know what I mean? So I find that interesting. But is there anything else that stands out?
The complete opposite to the airy instruments. You know. Definitely. I mean, it's clearly. I mean, deep sounds and long basses and stuff like that has something, emphasizes something scary, and of course in this case, very obviously Megatron being this huge monster type robot that is threatening everything around it. It's absolutely, I agree, it's the complete opposite. I think that's a well-selected clip by you, because it's definitely the complete opposite. It also is like a depressive kind of feeling, I think just imagine having the Harry Potter track below that. It would be like Monty Python, because it's kind of juxtaposing completely what you see. And it would ridicule the robot basically, and it would maybe it would work the other way around, because then if you put that track under the Harry Potter thing, it would give this ghost type figure something you don't know about it. You know what I mean? It's like something's wrong with it. It's uncanny. It's a ghost. It could fit to that. But the other way around, it would be like a satire, basically. Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah. Before we move on to the last element, which is power, just the last thing I think to say on depth again, on those clips again, I think one can't. We love the idea that one can talk about these in isolation, but that depth again on the Megatron scene, if you now think back to momentum, we can again use that knowledge and say, okay, look, this wasn't only low, it wasn't only a lot of depth. Actually, there was also the important interplay of making sure there was hardly any momentum.
Yeah.
Because again, that underlines that again, it's so obvious. An elephant doesn't move fast.
Yeah.
Megatron didn't move fast, so let's have it slow, let's have it low. Anyway, so the last element for us then is a fairly obvious one, but still worth talking about, which is power. So if we just watch the last scenes here. So, this one's pretty obvious in a way. So I think, and again, it will always, we'll have to look back at depth and we'll have to look back at momentum a little bit. But first, to look at it in isolation, I guess power, simply from a musical point of view, is intensity. So as you could hear, those instruments were playing pretty strongly. So if that was a bowed instrument, they're really digging in, with their bows. If it's a wind instrument, they're really blowing strong. So everything is at its kind of maximum power. In music, we call it dynamics, but it doesn't matter. So we're calling it power. And I think also the number of instruments is kind of interesting as well. So this was literally a full orchestra, just going for it. And if we look at momentum, because it was a battle scene, they were kind of going fast. We're not surprised probably to hear that not only were they playing loud, they were actually also playing quite fast. And in terms of depth, we probably won't be surprised to see that for maximum effect, there were some low instruments and there were some high instruments. So this was a real combination. If we move on now to see the opposite of that intense scene, let's look at the last scene here.
I truly, deeply love you. And before we die, I want you to know.
Yeah, I mean, literally the opposite. So all of a sudden, our orchestra has shrunk down to something like,
a flute.
Maybe a flute, a little bit of kind of whatever that was, harpsichord or something in the background. Again, it's a more serious scene. So of course, now we can talk about depth and momentum again. So the depth didn't want to be very, very low because that suggests largeness. It suggests, strength and all these sorts of things. She's feeling very vulnerable. It's a very fragile kind of interplay between these lovers who are about to meet their death, probably. It was
No, you gave it away.
No.
Just kidding.
But so, I think it's interesting that the depth is high, suggesting this kind of, it's a thinner sound. The momentum is slow because it's serious. And the power, we could all tell instantly, there are fewer instruments and they're playing softly.
Going back to the first power clip, the one with, the war scene. I think it's, it also plays with the fact that we all know what, like fanfares sound like military type, medieval. We don't see, it's almost like as if there were trumpet players inside that phalanx of horses playing that while they were quite obviously on an offensive, pushing back against some threat or whatever. And I think it is also from a filmic point of view, when you film something like this, it's very often, even for big budget productions, it's very, very hard to make these mass scenes look realistic because, put in simple terms, without CGI, it's almost impossible to get this amount of people together for any reasonable amount of money to do that. So basically what they do is like you always see this, Game of Thrones is a good example as well. You see juxtaposed very large, wide shots where you see a whole army, which is clearly done in CGI. It's like crowd replacement and stuff like that. And then you see some closer shots, which are more like, like medium type shots, where you have a maximum of maybe 4 or 5 horses next to each other. And camera quite low, so you don't actually see that there is nothing behind them, or, it's also put in via CGI. Obviously it gets, more easy to do this realistically with CGI these days, but, just to film that. And I think the music makes it easier for them because this music gives you, first of all, the sound element, not just the music, but the crowd sounds that you hear of all these people, which is clearly a lot more people than were actually there when they were filming that. And then on top of that, this massive score with this massive sounding, powerful music, and the whole orchestra going for it, as you said. I think that together combined makes it a very, very realistic scene, and that actually, that also saves money in post-production, to be honest, because if they didn't have a proper score like that or a proper audio track, which is comparatively, let's say, like in monetary terms, cheap to produce, compared to actually doing, like filming that whole thing with an army of extras, or doing a lot more CGI to make it look really big. I think it just gives it gives them a chance to save money, because it still looks like a huge scene. And if you take the whole audio level, like that's a good recommendation that I give to everybody all the time, is like, watch one of your favorite movies without audio, like no sound, no music, nothing, because that's the best way to analyze how a movie is done, how it's edited particularly, because basically sound and picture editing complement each other, so you don't actually see them, like you hide picture cuts by sound because the soundtrack goes over a cut, put in simple terms. And this is a perfect example for that, because if you take the sound away from that, you could clearly analyze every single shot, and you would see, okay, this is what they filmed, this is what they probably did in the computer, this is what they probably added somehow, and there's a couple of shots where you don't see much. It's like it's a way of doing these things very convincingly without spending, $500 million, but only 100 million on it. So, yeah.
I think to wrap up, you talk quite often. I think you as a creative filmmaker, you're interested in the whole juxtaposition side of things. But I think for the purposes of this thing, looking at these three elements, I think it's very interesting that ultimately there is a very intuitive, very clear, very straightforward, pragmatic relationship between what we see, what we hear, and if we can use those terms to translate that between the two mediums of kind of the visual filmmaking and the more abstract audio creation, I think that's quite valuable. That's
also one of the things that I think a lot of filmmakers that are starting out do wrong, that they put a big score on the images that they make, which it's a bit too much, it's easily too much, and that's you can tell that, you just can tell it. Like even if it's show reels and stuff like that, where you're like, okay, well, this sounds like it's probably Hans Zimmer type orchestra music, which you can get now for little money basically, but it's not it should fit what you see. That's a good point.
Yeah, so next episode we're going to basically take all this kind of these three principles, what we've kind of been discussing today, and then we're going to apply that to a piece of footage that we can then talk about. Again, it'll be kind of very relaxed, informal, kind of in conversation. Take a piece of footage. You kind of tell us what that footage kind of suggests from a filmmaking point of view, and then I'm going to work to using those three principles to bring a soundtrack to life for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Seb, and thanks to the audience for watching. Tune in for the next episode of this Filmstro and Cinema 5D tutorials on music for film. Thanks for watching.